The musician Joni Mitchell wrote, "We are stardust, billion-year-old carbon. We are golden, caught in the devil's bargain." I see patterns that repeat, connect, and often entangle us with our families, organizations, and cultures across distance and throughout time. We have inherited a lot from those who came before us. We're not born a blank canvas. Scientists at Emory University conducted an experiment. They gave male mice a mild electric shock coordinated with the scent of cherry blossom. They bred those mice, and even after 2 generations, the descendants reacted as if they had been shocked when they smelt the same cherry blossom scent. An inherited survival mechanism triggered by potential danger, initiating the state of fight, flight, or freeze. This largely unrecognized condition steers humanity. At a recent workshop, a lady called Jill shared her life of incompletions. She never saw anything through. Relationships, jobs, university, she couldn't see the point. But we learned that her grandmother's first child became sick. Despite her efforts to save the child died. What was the point? This traumatic event was kept secret from Jill's mother, who was the next child, later manifesting in Jill as a sense of powerlessness and helplessness. By identifying the source of Jill's issue, we could create clarity and focus on new perspectives. Mark Wallin, a leader in the field of inherited family trauma, says, "Remaining silent about family pain is rarely an effective strategy for healing it. The suffering will express in the fears and symptoms of a later generation because inherited experiences connect us to our systems long before we are born and long after we die." I was driving through my local town of Dover. At its heart, it struggles socially. It has been on the front line for over 2 millennia, and as England is a country built on conquest, Dover has seen invasions from the Romans, the Jutes, the Saxons, the Angles, the Normans, the French, the Germans. The traumas of conflict are left with the survivors and their descendants for generations and often repeated. And on this day, it was Brexit's battleground. There was a line of riot police facing 1,000 anti-immigration protesters. There's yet another scene in Dover's history. Let's dive into this as a systemic practitioner. Visualize, if you will, the anti-immigration protesters. See one of the men. Observe his emotion. Picture his face and hear the sound of his voice. Now, you weren't there, but you've just created what you think he was like. Our minds access memory, imagination, and inherited experience to prejudge and prepare us for the unknown. But with this resource, it's often difficult to remain on neutral ground. Now let's imagine something that wasn't in our picture. The protester with his parents standing behind him. His father, the son of a soldier killed in Dunkirk, whose body was brought to the shores of Dover. At times, this man belongs to the system of protesters, but at other times, he belongs to the group of grieving war survivors, like myself. By adopting a systemic lens gives opportunity to see people and not just the groups into which we place them. It can break the cycle of perpetuating conflict, revealing avenues where once there were none. This is how I choose to see people. My compassion grows, I remain open to connection, and that's where healing begins. And it reminds me, when I'm at my most vulnerable, how my own prejudgment, prejudice is fed by my fears. I recently worked with a lady called Sonia, whose ancestors were thrown off a ship, still in chains. The few that reach land began the population of the island. Now Sonia was a descendant of a cold-blooded act, and she, among others, understandably inherited the trauma in the form of rage against a vicious past. With this insight, time, and a little care, we were able to free Sonia in the present. Shifts in perspective create the potential for change. My grandfather, Benjamin, he was drafted in World War II from the then British colony of Guyana, where I was born. His grandparents were witness to slavery as children. Benjamin married his sweetheart Rosalind, and together they had 4 children, one of whom, my mother, journeyed to England to become a nurse in the NHS. Shifts in perspective create potential for change. What do you remember of Benjamin? He was a father, a romantic, a soldier, a British citizen. In contrast, these 2 people also had 4 children, one of whom remained in Canada, one was lost in World War I on Vermey Ridge. Another was a pianist who squandered his money in Paris on wine, women and song. What a disgrace. The family hid that secret for years. And then Walter, who was a captain and became an accountant. And perhaps these 2 people also had 4 children, one of whom, Ivy, married Walter. Walter and Ivy lived in Hampstead in London. Ivy owned a clothes shop on Regent Street. They had 2 sons. One became a doctor. It was my father. My path wasn't the medical profession. My passion was music. And could it be that over 20 years on the road, I've identified with this excluded great uncle, musician in Paris? It's quite possible, and perhaps his creative expression continues in me. Because by ignoring, hiding, or suppressing issues in systems almost guarantees that they will be expressed in some form by someone at a later time or a later generation. Do you remember Jill's grandmother and the trauma of losing the child kept secret? What's the point? Manifesting generations later as a sense of powerlessness and helplessness. By observing the origin of Jill's issue, enabled Jill to give birth to new motivation. And Sonia, whose ancestors were thrown off a ship, still in chains, swam and reached the island. Sonia is now no longer the descendant of victims, but incredible survivors. These gentle shifts in perspective can unchain us from the past. And the people of the town on the front line, long after the guns have fallen silent, some of those descendants of the survivors are still fighting that battle. And the anti-immigration protester, his parents standing with him, now his grandfather in clear view. In the system of men and women, we are fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, the descendants of the fallen. And a little hope is born, perhaps. This is how I choose to see people. My compassion grows. I remain open to connection. That's where the healing begins. Because inherited traumas teach us that there are no winners. We simply survive. But unlike mice, we can thrive. We can wake up and smell the cherry blossom simply as cherry blossom. So we are stardust, billion-year-old carbon. We are golden, caught in the devil's bargain. With a little attention, we can read the patterns that steer our systems, regain the courage to free ourselves from the cycles of the past, determine who we become, and consciously shape our destiny.